Let's stay on the issue of cruise ships, which we just heard. Obviously, cruise ships stranded right across the world at the moment. Now, the Maritime Union of Australia is urging the federal government to repatriate all crew members on foreign cruise ships, other than those directly responsible for marine operations, to address a growing humanitarian crisis. There are various estimates of just how many foreign crew members there are on foreign cruise ships in Australian waters. Dean Summers is the Australian National Coordinator of the International Transport Workers Federation. He joins us now. Thanks very much for talking to us. So, does Australia have an obligation to take crew members off these ships and repatriate them?
Well, we've got a moral obligation to look after these seafarers off this ship. We think there's somewhere between 11,000, 15,000 workers just drifting up and down our coasts. And if those ships were declared in distress, then we would have a legal obligation. And if seafarers had a distressful problem, then they would have to be able to be taken ashore and medevaced. The situation is that these people, 11,000 or 15,000, are just left in limbo. And we know that there are people being medevaced, two last night, I believe, under the cloak of darkness by boat. So let's get them all alongside. Let's triage them. Let's find out who needs immediate care, who needs hospitalisation. And I'm urging the government, and the Maritime Union's urging this federal government to get with us and to organise, facilitate repatriation of all of these people.
As we've seen in a number of cases, certainly it's the case in Fremantle, where the government's refusing a couple of ships to let their passengers, or crew members I should say, disembark. That's certainly the case with the Artania. You mentioned there the declaration of distress, which would trigger obligations for the Australian government to lend a hand. So what would trigger that? It would be up to the individual ships and their captains to make that distress call?
Well, do we need to wait for a technicality like that? Don't we have an obligation, and I think we do, and the unions think we do, to bring these ships alongside and get in front of the problem? I'm hearing reports that the New South Wales Commissioner, which is state-based, so only has a certain amount of reach, is saying that they'll send somebody out, the military or others, to test everybody. Now, that's okay. All that's going to do is show us the size of the problem from a New South Wales perspective. This is a national perspective. It's an international issue, and we have a moral obligation to look after these workers. They're in trouble. The industry is shrouded in secrecy. It's all flagged and registered in flags of convenience countries. So when we see governments like the US saying, go back to the country where you come from, and the countries don't exist, they're homeless and stateless ships because of the flag of convenience system. They only register in Barbados and Bermuda, Malta and Panama because they're tax havens. And so these ships should be registered in states like Australia and the US and places where they trade. And that goes to the core of the problem.
As you mentioned, New South Wales is contemplating some sort of military operation to perhaps test the crew members on board. But by your estimates, if they say there are up to 15,000 people stranded on their ships around Australia's coastline, that would be a massive operation, not only perhaps to test them, but to take them off the ships. Would you then have to quarantine them for 2 weeks and then repatriate them?
Of course. We expect they would have to go through all of those hoops to make sure that the integrity of our health in Australia is maintained. It's a huge problem, but Andrew, I don't think there's an alternative. We can force them to go over the horizon, but what happens then? The problem doesn't go away, and the problem's not even shifted. So we're saying this is a big logistics issue. Yes, bring everybody together. Let's get our heads together, bring them ashore, triage them, treat those people that need it, because there are people that need medical treatment now. Isolate those people that need isolating and get structure into a repatriation program which will see them all sent home. Now, the important part of this, Andrew, and we're stressing, is that the Australian government shouldn't be up for $1 of this. All this costs, all the expenses need to be sheeted back to Carnival Cruises, P&O Australia, if that's really the company, and the big cruise line industry. So let's get those people engaged, make them pay and get the problem dealt with.
Time is crucial here, isn't it? Because as you mentioned, already quite a number of crew members have fallen ill. They're now being treated in Australian hospitals. Potentially, this is a time bomb, isn't it? Because the longer you leave this, the more crew members are likely to be infected.
That's correct. And these are ships. There's 1,000 people, maybe more than 1,000 people on each of these ships. So you can imagine how easily that would spread. Now, perhaps they've got those people in lockdown, but they're small cabins. They're workers. They're not people that live in these state cabins on board these cruise ships, and they're eating and living in close quarters. Something has to happen, and we cannot turn our back on them. Not morally, not legally. So we are insisting the Morrison government look at this from a national perspective. It's going to take a national response, not a state-by-state response, so that we can get in front of the problem before it gets worse. If it's going to put pressure on our health services now, tomorrow it's going to be worse, and the next day is going to be worse, and we've got all those associated problems. So deal with the issue. Let's not shrug it off.
Yeah, I mean, you said you're insisting on the Morrison government do this. Have you had any representations to them? Have you had any response?
We've been talking to different government departments. We haven't got a relationship with the industry. This is an industry that the only people they don't employ is Australians, because if they employ Australians in the cruise ship, they have to pay Australian rates of pay and taxation and superannuation. They go to countries that pay much, much less, and they're very vulnerable crews. So we don't have a connection with the company. Internationally, we do. We have agreements for some of the industrial perspectives of this ship, and we're going to continue to put pressure on the Morrison government to come together in the spirit of coronavirus, and keep on hearing Morrison say we're all getting together shoulder to shoulder. Well, this is an issue that's going to take all of our efforts and a real conscious to deal with.
Dean Summers, Australian National Coordinator of the International Transport Workers Federation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.